What's cracking, people? I'm Theo Kane, welcome back to Slimehouse TV. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking Gundam. I'm going to be assembling Gundam, I'm going to be painting Gundam, which if you've seen any of my other episodes and you've seen how big my pile of shame is and how much unassembled gunpla that I've got to get through, is never a bad thing. So in this video, I'm going to be doing a bit of an old versus new comparison, seeing how some of the newer kits weigh up to the old ones, which again, if you've watched any of my videos where I build any of these old 30, 40-year-old kits, you'll know that they're quite the beast and quite the test of patience, and these were no exception. Like, no exception. I also want to go over some of my thoughts as well that I've got at the minute and talk a bit about the whole climate of Gundam right now in the Western world and how much of a big thing it is over here these days. Something I'd be really interested to know your thoughts on. So if all that sounds like a bit of you, then as always, sit back, make sure you're comfy, and let's do this. So you might remember me picking up this big haul of vintage Japanese model kits last year. My friend Cosmic Constructs, aka Richard, we went to his house, myself and Bentlegs, and we filmed a video covering all the awesome models that he makes and sculpts and 3D prints. And while I was there, he gave me this big pile of vintage Japanese model kits. And some of these are like 30 plus years old. Now he picked all these up at a model kit fair that he went to. And this was the kind of model fair that didn't really specialise in Japanese model kits. So these were all going really cheap and nobody was really batting an eyelid at them. So he sent me a message and said, look, there's all these kits for sale. Is there any that you want? And when I saw how cheap they were, I was just like, yeah, I'll take all of them. Now I've barely made a dent in this pile so far. I have built a couple in a previous video that I did earlier in the year, or last year, I can't remember. The last 12 months have been an absolute blur. But I did build the V Gundam from Shaw's Counterattack and then also the Hammer. And although I had a lot of fun doing them, I did hit quite a few snags with them just because basically I underestimated how long it would take to paint them and stick them together. Unlike new model kits, these old Bandai Gundam kits, you have to actually glue and paint. They're not just all snap fit, they've not got all the colours on the runners. And some of these old kits do still have a little bit of those multicoloured plastics on the sprues, on the runners, whatever you want to call them, but nothing like what you'd find on modern Gundam kits today. So they did take a little bit longer than I wanted them to, but when I were all done, when I were all finished, I ended up with two kits that I were really happy with and they look really cool on the shelf displayed with my others. So I'm going to pick two more out of this pile, and as you can see, I am kind of spoilt for choice because there's still so many here that I've not had a chance to get to yet. There is though two in particular, two very specific ones that I've chose to go for. So I'm going to be going first of all for the Yak Doga from Shaw's Counterattack, another really cool iconic suit with a really nice colour scheme, and I'm going to go for the Hayakoshiki, which is Char Aznavour's mobile suit from Zeta Gundam, which next to the first ever series of Gundam is probably my favourite, and it's also my favourite iteration of Char Aznavour, I think. I really like when he's working on the side of the quote-unquote good guys, and he's teaming up with Amuro Ray and Camille and everyone else, so I'm going to go for this one. But like I said, I didn't just pick these two kits at random. There is a reason that I'm going to be picking these two kits today, and why these are the two that I'm going to build out of all of these other kits that I could go for. So on top of having a bunch of unbuilt vintage Gundam, I've also got quite a few unassembled modern gunpla kits that I were keen to get stuck into as well. So earlier this year, myself and a crew drove out to Manchester to check out a shop called Kidultverse, a store which specialises in Japanese model kits with a big focus on Gundam. Now this is a shop that's not only stacked to the rafters with gunpla, but also gets huge deliveries of Japanese exclusive kits. They'd even had a big delivery of stock on the day that we went, and because of how spoilt for choice we were, we ended up coming home with quite a hefty haul between us. And ever since that day, I've had mine sat here in the studio waiting for me to find the right time to be able to get stuck into them. So these are all the kits that I picked up from Kidultverse in Manny. They're all high grade kits, which is pretty much the only kind of kit that I bother with. And they're also all mobile suits, all characters, all designs from the original run of Gundam, the original saga. So from the first series with Amuro Ray all the way up to Shaw's Counterattack. That's my favourite generation of Gundam, like Transformers Generation 1, the equivalent I would say. And some of them I'm going to talk about later, but these two in particular are what I want to get into first of all. So as you can see, I basically picked up two kits that I already had the vintage versions of at home waiting to be assembled. So I bought both modern versions of the Hyakdoga and the Hayakashike, or Delta Gundam, which is basically a transforming version of the Hayakashike, like a what-if version. This was never in the cartoons or anything like that, from what I understand. I think this might have only appeared in comics and stuff, but it's basically the Hayakashike, but transforms. And the reason I went for this version is because I've just basically never built a transforming gunpla kit before, and I thought it would be quite fun. When I did my other Gundam video building some of those vintage kits, I talked a lot about old versus new, and I figured that there would be no better way of comparing a new kit and an old kit than to pick up the newer version of one that I'd got that came out 40 years previous, pretty much. So I've got the old kits and the new kits, both made like 4 decades apart. Now, because it's been a while since I built myself a Gundam kit, I thought I'd ease myself in first of all and assemble the modern Hayakashike set, just because I'd be willing to bet my life on it being way easier to build than its OG counterpart. And as I said, I know this is a transforming one, but still, comparatively to the old versions, these new kits go together so much easier and the whole process is just way more streamlined. As I mentioned earlier as well, the old kits need to be glued together, unlike these ones that all snap fit with very clear instructions, and if you do make a mistake, you can always try and prise them apart, which obviously you wouldn't be able to do if you were fixing them all together with plastic weld or super glue. Now, something that I clocked straight away is just how metallic this thing is, and way more shiny than the standard kit, the one that you can get that doesn't transform, which was just another bonus to choosing this Hayakashike. It is a little bit more pricey, probably double the price of the other one, but well worth it in my opinion for a kit that looks this shiny and chrome. Now, this is not the actual colour of the plastic, it has been coated, very similar to something like an old C-3PO figure, which in my experience can be a little bit brittle, so I was making sure that I was being extra careful while I was snipping away at it. So that's that guy, pretty much finished. I completed him last night, and there's a few things that I want to talk about that kit later on, but as suspected, it was an absolute joy to assemble. It went together very easily. The same is probably not going to be able to be said about the next one that I'm going to start. The OG original Hayakashike from, what date? 1985. So yeah, a good 40 years before this one came out. Or I think this one came out in 2012, but you know what I mean. A good 3 decades at least between these two kits. And if you watched my last video where I did an old versus new Gundam comparison, you'll know that I got quite frustrated. I got quite angry, I got quite annoyed. There were a few snags that I hit that I wasn't expecting. I didn't expect it to be so hard to put together. But I'm hoping now that I've had a bit of experience with those old kits, that this one will go together much easier and I'll have a lot more of an idea of what to expect with it. So yeah, hopefully this one should go together okay. No problems at all. Who am I kidding? So the first thing that I did was hit any part of the sprue that I were going to be painting later with a matte lacquer. Even though I didn't want the actual colour of the plastic to look matte, it's a known trick that if you do this, paint will stick to the sprue much better. So I figured I would do this and then hit everything with a satin lacquer after when they were all done and all finished. So knowing that there were parts of this kit that needed to be painted before being assembled, I decided to put together everything first of all that didn't need to be painted, or I could get away without painting. So it took a bit of working out where would be the best place to start and which parts I could semi-assemble and then leave until I needed to start putting some paint on them. These old instruction books as well, although very clear and well illustrated, as you can imagine, are not quite as refined and as easy to follow as the newer books are. So there were definitely a few parts that confused me right off the bat. The plastic that these kits are made from as well does feel ever so slightly cheaper and more brittle compared to the materials. The ABS plastic that most kits are made from these days, these ones feel a lot more snappable and crushable, so when you're cutting away at them and filing them and sanding them down, you really do feel like you have to be extra careful. Now, very much like modern day kits, back then they still used the polycaps for the articulation points on these figures. And although nowadays they do have a lot of different types of these polycap fittings, these 40-year-old ones still feel and work, to my eyes at least, very much the same. So remember a minute ago when I said some of these instructions can be hard to follow? Well, even on the newer kits, I sometimes end up assembling things wrong and then having to go back and pull them apart so I can redo them. Like I said though, these kits have to be glued together. Now I've learned that plastic weld or polystyrene cement does work best. It gives you great adhesion, but it does mean that you have to really commit to anything that you put together, because once you've stuck them, there's no breaking them apart like you can on a new kit. A lot of these old kits as well, you can't even dry fit them and hold them in place so you can see if it's right. Like, you have to glue them, that's it, there's no other way around it. You also have to be super careful as well, because any of this polystyrene cement touches any of the outer areas and it'll melt the plastic and give it a weird texture. And also on top of everything else, because a lot of these seams don't go together perfectly because they're so old, these kits, you have to clamp them together just to get them to stay where you want them to. Oh, while I remember as well, I want to give a big shout out to Dan Does and Bill Making Stuff's mum for this very cool tool that she bought me for my birthday. Now, they're actually supposed to be used for carving panel lines and details into Gundam armor plating and stuff, but they're also very handy for just clearing away any unwanted bits of flash or mess. It's the first time that I've used it since I got it, and it definitely came in handy while I were building the kits for this episode. So it were time to actually start putting some paint on this kit. Now, unlike new Bandai Gundam sets that are mostly, for the most part, all pre-molded in the right coloured plastic, these older ones are made up of way less pieces, and because of this, they do require you to paint in many sections of them a lot of the time. So as you saw earlier, I sprayed these first with a matte lacquer, which definitely helps the paint stick to them much better. The downside to that though is you have to be extra careful and extra neat, because you can't scrape away any mistakes that you might make like you can if it wasn't primed. I mean, you can, but it just leaves a messy, scratchy texture where the lacquer's been carved away, which is obviously not a good look, not if you're wanting things to look slick and neat like I do. So it's one of those cases where you kinda have to pick your poison. Paint on shiny plastic and have to do lots of layers because the paint doesn't want to stick to it. Or have your paint stick to it really well, but any mistakes, any painting outside the lines is really gonna cost you. And I think I still prefer doing it this way, for the larger sections and big panel areas at least. For stuff like eyes and more finer details, I think I'd still prefer to paint straight onto the raw shiny plastic. At least if I do that, I can get a little pin and scrape that little mistake away, which is always a nice relief for me because trust me, I make a lot of mistakes whenever I paint anything. So once I'd got everything looking as nice and as neat as it was ever going to look, I started snipping everything that was left off the sprue and got to fitting the whole thing together. And as I said, although everything on here does have to be glued and some of the seams don't go together as perfect as you would like them to, because these kits are made up of so few pieces compared to the newer ones, once they are all painted, you really do start throwing them together pretty quickly. The only thing taking up any amount of time really is the fact that you have to paint up any parts that you couldn't get to while it was still attached to the runner, and also that you have to wait for anything that you've stuck together to dry before you can move on to the next step. So I spent the next few hours getting the rest of it all assembled, making a few mistakes here and there, and getting a bit of glue in places where I really didn't want it to go, but I just kind of accept now that these old kits are never going to look as perfect as I picture them in my head, but that's cool, and I continued to work into the early hours of the morning to make sure that I could get this kit finished on time and had the following day to start the next one. So whilst Theo of the past gets on with finishing that kit and starting on the next one, I thought it'd be a good time to jump in and just let you know a bit about where I'm at with the whole Gundam thing at the minute. So if you've been watching my channel for a number of years, you'll know that Gundam has always had a bit of a presence here. I first went to the Odaiba Gundam base like over 10 years ago or something like that when it was really small. I then went back about 3 or 4 years later and it was good to see how much it had grown. I've built quite a few kits on the channel and it's something that, even though I don't do it all the time, because obviously I'm primarily a toy making channel, I do like to feature on the channel whenever I've got like a good excuse to do it. As I just said, I'm a toy maker, that's primarily the thing that I do here on the channel, but making a toy requires a lot of preparation, lots of sculpting, printing, lots of trial and error, painting and all that kind of thing. So it's really nice to just have a bit of a palette cleanser now and again and build something that looks cool and can look nice on the shelf, and is something that's a lot more chill and relaxed to put together than making a toy is. Now, when I first got into Gundam, bear in mind I was pretty late to the party. I didn't buy my first kit until like 7 years ago or something like that. They were still really hard to find. You couldn't just walk into a shop on your high street and pick one up. You had to get them from specialist retailers, or you had to order them from Japan directly, or pick one up if you went to Japan yourself. Like whoever bought all of those old school kits that I showed you at the start of this video, they must have really gone out of their way to acquire all of those over in England. But nowadays, it's never been easier to pick up Gunpla in the UK. I went to Forbidden Planet the other day, which is just a normal high street retailer, and they've got a whole section of Gunpla. Not only Gundam and the kits, but also the tools and merchandise and everything else that you can imagine, like a whole section. Also recently, Bandai UK opened a pop-up store down in London that's entirely dedicated to Gunpla and Gundam. I got invited down to the open day, but I was busy so I couldn't make it, but it looks amazing on the pictures and on the videos. So basically something that used to be very niche over here in the Western world is now kinda mainstream. So first of all, I'd be really interested to know what your thoughts are on that. Is this something that you think's awesome and you're embracing it? Or are you somebody that used to have to really go out of their way for their kits and now is kinda annoyed that anybody can just pick them up? Now I can kind of see it from both angles. There's definitely some things that I used to really like and really be into, and then they got a little bit more popular, and the fact that I could just go into shops and see this stuff and pick up merchandise kind of made me not be as into it anymore. It kind of lost its allure for me. There's also other stuff though that I've always been into, and no matter how much stuff I see of it in shops and things, I'm always just as into it. I still embrace it just as much, and if anything, it's nice to be able to go out just into my local town and see something that at one point you couldn't really see any merchandise of, and now you can see it all the time. And just to make it clear as well, I'm not trying to sound gatekeeper, it's just if something is so readily available, it kind of loses that treasure element to me. It kind of loses its rarity, its spark, if I can just go into a shop and pick one up, or if I can go on Amazon and grab one. So yeah, I would love to know what your thoughts are on it, because I can kind of see it from both angles. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about as well is, as much as I do love Gundam and I love building it and showcasing it on the channel, it's not the focus of Slimehouse TV. I am primarily a toy making and retro toy showcase channel. I don't really build Gunpla every single month or anything like that. I do it a couple of times a year. And also, with it being so readily available now, I don't just want to feature it on the channel regularly. I don't really like showcasing things that you can just go and pick up in a shop, because anybody can do that, and I like to provide something here on Slimehouse that's pretty unique and one of a kind and isn't like run of the mill. Which is why I really like to do these old comparison videos where I get an old kit from years and years ago that you can't just go and buy in a shop anywhere, that isn't so just available. You can buy them on eBay and stuff, you can go out hunting for them, but not anybody can just get one. So I like to be able to get the old kit and then compare that to the new kit, and that to me feels like its own little niche. I'm sure there's hundreds of other people that do it on YouTube, but it's not something that everybody can do. And that's the reason why I've chose not to build any of these other kits yet. Because I picked up some really nice kits from Kidultverse. I picked up this remake, this re-release of the original first ever RX-78-2. But I only want to build that if I've got the original version next to it to do a comparison video. And the chances of me finding that very old OG first ever kit out in the wild is very slim. But if I do find it, which I might do, I do come across a lot of retro stuff, then that would make an awesome video. Again, I'm sure people have done it before, but I would really like to do that personally. I've also got some other really cool kits here, like the Marasai. That would make an awesome comparison video if I can get hold of the old version. And then I've got this big boy, the Psycho Gundam, which is still a Universal Century high-grade kit, so it is in scale with the others that I've been building, but in the cartoon, this thing is massive. It's like 3 times the size of a Gundam. So that would be one that would be awesome to build, and if I could get the old one of that, which is actually not even to scale, so this one would be even bigger than it, it would again make a really interesting comparison video. So I'm kind of torn, because I really do want to build these kits, but also I want to hold out to see if I find the old ones and do a comparison episode on them. So yeah, that's just something else that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. Do you think that's worth it? Do you think I should just build these now? Or do you think I should hold out and then build them next to their old school counterpart? I'd be really interested to know. So by this point I'd finished that Hayakashike and I'd moved on to the OG Hyak Doga, and I went with a very similar process to begin with when it came to painting it. I started off by spraying those parts of the sprues that were going to have paint on them with a matte lacquer, and I briefly mentioned earlier as well that when you do spray the sprue with the matte, it does dull it quite a bit. So what I intended to do was, once I'd painted these kits and they were all assembled, I'd then go back and hit both of them with a satin or a gloss lacquer just to bring that plastic shine back and to hopefully tie all those separate parts of the model back together again. What's really nice about these Shaw's counter-attack kits as well is by this point Bandai had engineered them in a way that they didn't really need much glue, like barely any, so other than the fact that I had to paint this kit, it was flying together pretty quickly. Everything were going good, everything were going well, at least that's what I thought, because just when I was thinking nothing could go wrong and the day was going smoothly, disaster struck. Why? Everything was going fine, and pow! TV fell off the wall. Look! It's literally ripped the plasterboard screws out the wall. It's not even a heavy TV. What is going on? Why do I have such bad luck whenever I'm trying to build old school Gundam? Why? Well, that was super annoying. It is super annoying. I was just thinking, do you know what? Compared to last time, building these little Gundam kits, these 30, 40-year-old kits, it's been a lot easier. I've not really ran into any problems. There's not really been that many snags. There's been a couple of little hiccups that I've had to overcome, so a few little hurdles, but no, it's been okay. And I'm just sat watching Gundam and I thought, you know what, I might get a shot of that in a minute. I'll get a shot of the Gundam playing on the TV because that would look quite cool. And I pulled the TV round on the bracket and just angled it a little bit and I was just going to get a shot. Next minute, crash, bang, boom! It's just on the floor and the TV has got a big green line through it and all the frames fell off and it's completely broken. So it's a shame because I did really like that little white telly. You don't see very many white tellies anymore. That was from like 2011, those kind of times. You don't see them very often. My dad got it off a house clearance and I did really like it. But he did actually mention the other day that he'd picked up a little thin black TV and if I wanted it. And I says, no, I don't need it. I've got a lovely white one that I love. Well, not anymore. Anyway, while I've got your attention, I might at least let you know how I'm getting on with the OG 40-year-old Hyak Doga kit, which I was actually having a lot of fun with. I was having a lot of fun with it. I also decided to paint some of it on the runners and then bits that were a bit harder to get to, I cut them off and painted them individual. What I've also been thinking as well, because these are not really made up from too many parts, these old kits, you can get the whole mech suit on like 3.5 sprues as opposed to a new kit which can be like 7, 8, 9 runners. I figured what I would do is cut off all these big recognisable sections and then lay them all out on the table and assemble them all at the end that way. I've never really done it that way before because I'm worried that I'm going to lose parts and things, but like I said, these are made up from not many parts, so I don't really think I'll end up losing any of these big pieces. He says, who knows? With how today's been going, the only positive I can take is that earlier I had the 2 assembled Gundam kits that I've already built underneath that TV on that shelf, and if they were still there and I'd have not moved them like within the last hour, they'd have copped for it as well, and they'd have both been shattered. So yeah, I've just got to see the silver linings in this whole thing. I'll get a new TV. It's not the end of the world, although I did really like that white TV. I'm so sad. Now, apart from a couple of sections not quite sitting together as smooth as I would like them to and them needing to be glued, as I said, most of this kit did go together pretty easy, and there's not really anything that I can say different about it that I haven't already said about the Hayakashike and other OG kits before it. It was a pretty smooth and straightforward build, which after what had just happened is exactly what I needed, because I could have right done without this kit giving me any aggro. As I've said before, to me Gundam has to be fun and relaxing for me to enjoy it. I want it to be like a jigsaw puzzle. I have to do a bit of thinking but not too much. I do enough thinking and stressing when it comes to the toys that I make and dealing with all the situations that come with that. So yeah, when it comes to putting together Gundam, I just want to have a cool thing to put on my shelf that looks nice and looks Japanese and old school. So right at this moment, this was exactly the kind of kit that I needed. A little bit of a challenge, but for the most part, smooth sailing. As you can see as well, some of these old kits hold together with screws, which is something that you'd never see in a modern day kit, at least not to my knowledge. I've never built a new one that uses them, but it does lock stuff together really nice and is way more fun than gluing them. So by now, I'd been working on this mobile suit for a good few days. I'd been working on this whole project for like a week, amongst other things. As you can probably hear, the 3D printer were going in the background during a lot of my talking segments, and because now I was in a real good workflow, I just kind of zoned out, got stuck in, and got on with trying to get everything finished. And so as I saw the 40-year-old Hayak Doga all coming together, I was really looking forward to seeing it finished, showcasing all of the finished figures together, having a proper look at them, comparing them, and of course seeing how these old school OG Bandai Gunpla kits held up to their much slicker and much more refined modern day equivalents. So starting off, first of all, let's take a look at the old school Hayaka Shike, the first kit that I built for this video, and as you can see, in the end, it came together pretty nice. Now, out of all of the kits that I put together for this episode, this one was definitely the most simple in terms of the build, but as you know, I did quite a bit of painting on this one. I also mentioned this was one of the ones that I was going to hit with a satin lacquer, just to tie everything together to make sure that none of the paint scratched off, because there were some pretty big areas on this one that all had to be painted over. It's interesting as well with this one being a Hayaka Shike but not being gold, because as you saw, the modern day version of this kit that I built right after was made from a completely different looking plastic. So speaking of that modern day Hayaka Shike or Delta Gundam, that one, as you can see, came together beautifully. And check that metallic gold. Now that it's all put together, I feel like I could wear this guy on a chain. What's funny as well is that even though this is basically just the modern day version of the Hayaka Shike, proportion wise, there's quite a big noticeable difference, and this is the same for the regular version as well, not just the Delta Gundam. Basically all new Hayaka Shike kits do this, and this is the same for the entire body really, but for me it's most noticeably on the bottom half. The feet and the legs on both these are so totally different. The new one's legs are so much more slicker and sharp compared to the clunky look of the old one. In many ways it looks a lot less goofy, and for a modern day more refined look, I can see why they did this and made everything thinner and had the feet a bit more longer and pointy and stuff. It does just look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, a bit more refined, but because I'm an old school guy and a retro guy, I've got to say that proportion wise I do still prefer the old school version, even if the new one does objectively just look a lot more grandiose and a lot more flashy. As I also mentioned as well, this one was supposed to transform, and it kinda does, but I got halfway through building the transforming part, and I realised that you had to take a bunch of bits off this figure and break it all down, and I didn't really want to be messing about like that. I was under the impression that I'd be building a kit that you could actually transform, like, I don't know, a transformer, but it really isn't like that, so I decided to give the transforming part of this thing a swerve and just stick to displaying it as the regular mobile suit version. So moving on now to the Hayak Doga. Here we've got the old school original that you just saw me build, and this one came together really nice as well. As I mentioned, barely any glue needed on these old Shaw's counter-attack kits, and other than the fact that my TV fell off the wall mid-build and just reinforced the fact that I feel like these old Gunpla kits are cursed, the assembly of the actual figure itself was kinda effortless. The same can also be said for the much younger modern day version kid brother Hayak Doga, which I just built off camera because I could do without filming myself build another kit for this video. And as you can see, unlike the two Hayaka Shike sets, these two side by side do actually look pretty similar. Obviously the new one has more posability options and stuff and is clearly more refined in terms of its articulation and its proportions, but it's interesting how they changed the Hayaka Shike so much, but when it came to the Hayak Doga, for the most part, they kept it kinda looking the same. Now obviously there's so much more that I could say in terms of comparing these kits, so many more little fine details that I could deep dive into, talking about slightly different colour variations and weapon loadouts and stuff. The new sets were of course much easier to build and the instructions were a lot more clear. The newer ones used stickers instead of water transfers, the plastic is a lot less breakable, and just so many different small things. But the one point that I think's the most noticeable over everything else is the fact that even though these OG kits are like 30-40 years old, and take a little bit more time in terms of painting them and glue drying, I was still able to put all these things together back to back over the course of a few days without any real hiccups and without anything feeling like the technology had changed too much. Like, obviously they're easier to build now, but they're not so drastically different that they feel like a completely different hobby, and I think that's the best thing about building Gundam. Whether the ones that you buy from a shop now or ones that came out decades ago, they still feel like Gundam. And to me that just shows how incredible the engineering was back then, and is still to this day, and why when it comes to Gunpla, no matter how many times that I build them, no matter what decade they're from, and no matter what version of the kit it is that I'm building, simple or complicated, they still never fail to not feel super impressive to me. So I'd love to know what you think of today's builds. I'd love to know which ones were your favourite and which versions you prefer. New school or old school, old versus new. Which one do you think slaps the hardest? And if you had to pick which two, which set would you personally want to have displayed in your toy collection? If you enjoyed this video today, then as always, please don't forget to give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because if you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to like some of the other stuff that I drop as well. Especially if you enjoy old toys and toy making and Japanese toys and creative stuff. If you want to help support videos like this, help support the toy making that I do, help support get materials in so that I can try new things, and also go on adventures and film stuff out and about, then I do have a Patreon. That's patreon.com/SlimehouseTV. You get exclusive access to my Discord, you get exclusive access to STLs from time to time, but fundamentally, you just help me keep the lights on here at the channel and help me make this brand and help me make Slimehouse TV bigger and better than ever. I do also have a merch store now attached to my YouTube channel with all my own designs. Everything on there is my own work and it's all really good quality. I've ordered quite a bit of it now and I've been really impressed with everything. Even got these little beanie hats in at the minute, just in time for the colder months, so go and check that out and see if there's anything on there that you fancy. Like I said, again, that all helps go back directly into the channel to help me keep this thing going and help me keep the lights on here at Slimehouse TV. So yeah, really hope you've enjoyed this video today. With all the other stuff that you could be watching on YouTube, it really does mean a lot that you come back here on the regular and watch some Slimehouse TV, and I hope to catch you in the next one. But until then, I'm Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV, and I'm gone. Pow. Pow.